This lesson for the Cornet Project class will demonstrate how a human spells it out for those who are embracing AIDS, that is, the ape identity syndrome. Of course, the key focus now is apes assailing authorship of the Bible. We're speaking of the inspiration by God Himself. God breathed it. And of course, I've referenced many of the modern, most popular assaults against the Bible, uh, going back first to the Four Horsemen, Daniel Dennett, who wrote a book, Breaking the Spell, Christopher Hitchens, God is Not Great, and then Sam Harris, The End of Faith, and then Richard Dawkins, the ambassador of the apes, who even wrote in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, describing himself as an ape. Those gentlemen were called the Four Horsemen and were quite formidable in their assault. Christopher Hitchens, however, seemed to be more in line with what um, those of us, let's say, Anabaptists, who had suffered the atrocities of state established religion. And Christopher Hitchens was not simply saying there's no God, he was also speaking against theological fascism, crimes in large established theistic traditions, religious orders, all state established, and demonstrating that those are things that should be addressed and dealt with. So, and then I moved forward to the unsurpassed Alex O'Connor, formerly known cosmic skeptic, how he would take on people at any level of scholarship, theologians, philosophers, apologists, or someone who is all three, like the Dr. William Lane Craig, unsurpassed in his world renowned scholarship and his ability to debate and things like that. So, also, I reference Rationality Rules, the channel. The person producing the content there is Stephen Woodford, and he takes on every level of argument for the existence of God. He demonstrates fallible features in those arguments. And then Paulogia, I use him as an example of someone who was once a believer, what he called a young earth creationist, and how he lost his faith. And apparently was a big deal to a lot of people. Of course, I demonstrated the blind spot as I will today, but separating the chronological age of the earth and then the compounded decay in the earth, which is a measure of the severity of death. Some would say, speak of entropy and decay rates. Entropy is a larger category, speaking of how order disintegrates into disorder. And then, of course, we have a Bible word for that, apolemi, loose away, lose its original form. And then, of course, decay rates are accelerating, and no one has to be told that. And according to the Bible, the mathematical model in the Bible is Adam originally had endless life on earth. Then his lifespan was reduced to 1,000 years, that 1 day period, defined by the Bible as 1,000 years. He died at 930 years, leaving us only a 70-year balance, according to Psalm 90, where with strength we might live beyond 70 years. And so now we today find many people not living to 1 year old and hardly any living to 100 years. And so our decay rate is accelerated by 10 times. I referenced this book, The Ape's Case for the Bible's Divine Origin. And I did that because that's something I was working on, because I don't think everyone always hears what they're saying. And several years ago, perhaps around 2009 or 10, I was in the class called Psychology of Religion, and I encountered a speaker named Richard Dawkins where we had to review the video. And in it, he was speaking of people, humans, as he was classifying. There's a class of humans, he says, that are apes. And of course, we define human as a person who's created in the likeness or the image and likeness of God, a living soul. And of course, that person has the inalienable rights given by God, God given right to life, which is certainly always in dispute today. Apparently, advocates for death are everywhere and always among us. I believe there was a famous psychologist, perhaps it might have been Freud. Of course, I have no interest in his research. William James, the professor of theology at Harvard, who developed a field of psychology, that would be my interest. However, I think it was even Freud who had observed a strange fixation on death and a death wish among people. But what I want to do is I'd mention Genesis um, 1, for example, where the value of pi calculated, and then John 1:1, where the value of E could be computed. So I realized I'd never written that down, and I'll put the link to that PDF so you can have that. But all you do is take the number of letters, which are 28 letters in the first verse of Genesis, multiply it by the product of the letters, and then that would give you 3.14155, and then to the 17th, 10 to the 17th power. You remember pi, as we remember, as we had to 3.14159, then 265, I think 35. Anyway, and then we saw that if you then divide it by the number of words 7, which multiply that by the product of the words, then you get 3 point, well, you don't need me to read that for you, but that's how it came to this number here. And then of course, John 1:1 E, same thing, number of letters times the product of the letters, number of words times the product of the word. But notice what's so obvious is that these things are divided. That's in a ratio. Notice that to separate chronological age of the earth from the compounded decay would be like separating the letters from the words they make. And here we had 2.718313 times 10 to the 40th, and you remember pi is 2.7118281828 45, 90, 45. That's enough places. So we've demonstrated that, and that was really quite striking because it's insightful, especially under the guidance as I worked with Eddie Johnson as research assistants for Dr. John E. Penn. The late Dr. John E. Penn, former professor of hermeneutics, he was a scientist. Of course, our systematic theology professor was an engineer, so it would be very typical for us to have a mathological view from the seminary. Disciple in the Koine text, before I forget, is Mathetes. And you can recognize this, that's M-A-T-H. So we take a mathological perspective, even though we might just be using arithmetic, but inverse relationships, ratios, it's all basically an elementary algebra class, perhaps, if that's where you're first old enough to realize what you're being taught. So I have some reading here from the evidence that demands a verdict by Josh McDowell, 1979. It says there were several factors in the Bible coming to be. So it was written over 1,500 year span. I've said that before, written by over 40 generations, written over by 40 different authors. And then he lists in his book, and I will put the link to it. It's an ebook version now. But he talks about one was a fisherman, one was a herdsman, military general, Joshua, Nehemiah, a cupbearer, Daniel, a prime minister, Luke, a doctor, Solomon, a king, Matthew, a tax collector, Paul, a rabbi. But remember, we are now having to face the fact that the APES case is that the authorship is unauthenticated, can't be determined, can't be proven who even wrote these things. I believe one person's now saying like Paul never existed, others are saying Jesus never existed, and then of course Bart Ehrman steps up, ironically, to contradict the assertion that Jesus didn't exist. So he still believes Jesus lived among us. So he believes Jesus lived and died, was crucified, died, of course, and buried. He just has made one step backwards and saying he no longer has enough evidence to assert the resurrection. Then, of course, it says written in different places, written at different times, written during different moods, written on 3 continents. Oh my goodness, 3 different languages: Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, and then it goes on and on. It's an excellent work. What I was about to do, though, however, is just reduce that to what we know as factorial. So let's just say it's 18 things. I really didn't want to count things that didn't matter. Time span is 1, but to count every year in a 1,500 year period really isn't the way factorial works. So to factor in the lengthy time span, the 3 continents, the 3 languages, the almost 8 genres. So I put all that in there. I came up with 18 that I believe would be legitimate, and that produced a six quadrillion 402 trillion 373 billion 705 million 728,000. So noticing all the factors and then noticing why, if you then notice that the Bible as we have it today could have appeared in one of 6 quadrillion 402 trillion 373 billion 705 million 728,000 ways. I was really impressed with when the apes began to pick it apart, they actually just increased the exponentiality of it, and we can express that factorially and notice what would it look like and how would we bring this together. Now, those of us in this class, and I've learned you can increase the playback speed on your video. So if you're not in this Bible language class, you can just speed up. But to help spell this out for people who really have a hard time with what do we say to people who are saying themselves to be apes, I was just trying to give you an example of how these odds of this are not just remarkable, but it builds a case for somehow these people who didn't live in the same time periods, never knew each other, no internet, no consensus. And I'd read a reference by Richard Dawkins who even said that a good typist, now that's something that no longer exists, but would make 1 error per page. And basically he said that by the time you get to so many typing, let's say if you type something, had someone else have them type it and keep passing along, he had done some type of statistics, and I'll find that because that's another interesting thing, that basically 99% of the original document would no longer exist. So that's quite striking. How do we have documents with such precision when we have the ambassador of the apes telling us that you can just take an original document and continue to hand it off to a typist until the original document would 99% of it no longer be there, which is very interesting because he builds a case that those of us who are just mere humans can certainly appreciate. Bereshith, I had to make a line because sometimes I'm getting a little bit sloppy. Bereshith bara. Bereshith bara. Then we had Elohim. Yes, those dots are important. If you were in the Hebrew class and you had a Hebrew teacher, Dr. Mark Thornton, Dr. Randy Murray, you definitely know how important it is to get these things right. And it's good to have been disciplined that way. So in beginning, he created, so God created. We had this word eighth, the heavens, hasha, shamayim. Now I'm using the block Hebrew because we teach the children, we taught them before, and this is something that was even used by people from whom I descend, Cherokee. Even in this country, they use block Hebrew. Hashamayim. Created the heavens. Now we have the eighth. And I'll tell you what, I'll squeeze it in since we're really dealing with numbers. So, and haaretz. So this is how you could spell it out. Now, I don't know where you would find someone who says they are, let's say, atheist, who would even listen or want to. It's called source avoidance, and I certainly don't begrudge all of us for seeming to have that same symptom. The apes have it, and so do the humans, who are people. A human is a person who's created in the image and likeness of God. Yet, when you come to the text, we've noticed that talk is the key source of priming, where people, once we're told something, we develop a strong aversion, even if it's something written. And Jesus himself dealt with that with his own people. So I was just about to plug in the numbers here. So we had that and 1, of course, and this is 400. This is 300. This is 200. Of course, these numbers, like I said, you probably couldn't find anyone on a college campus who would care to take the time. But eventually, like I said, you could put all this in one sheet, at least help your friends who can't seem to grasp the idea that one in a quadrillion ways, any one of a quadrillion ways, the Bible as we know it could have appeared, and yet we have demonstrable things like pi and e with such easy elementary usage of arithmetic. So that's 2, 1, and Resh 200. And then we had Elohim 1, what is that? 5, 10, 40, and then that's 30. So we have 70, 86, just confirming the work here. And you can do this yourself easily. So here's 1, here's 400, and then here we had 5, and then of course we have 300 for this one, 40 for that one, 10 for this one, and 40 again here. So now we have 80, 395. That's all checking out. This is 6, 1, 400, 407, and then we have Haaretz. This is 90. This is 1. We had Resh 200, and then of course this again is 5. So that's 295. What we learned is that would tabulate or become a sum of 2,701, which called our attention to Proverbs 3:19, where it said God had laid the foundation of the earth. And of course, I'll put the link. I'd forgotten to do it to mathematical monotheism. For those of you that don't actually interact with the text, you can read results of people who do and notice that this is unassailable. It's all, like I said, for something that could have been one of 6 quadrillion ways. It's quite interesting how we can write it so succinctly. There we go. Now, so we have, we'll do the standard value and the ordinal value. Ordinal just refers to the order in which they appear, and that's really no big deal there. This is both the same here, 8 and 8. And then we have this, Lamed was 30, so this is 20. Yeah, I don't know why. That's 40, and this is 5. This is 5. This is see, 13, I think it was, and 11. Yeah, so here we go. This gave us make sure, 18, 19, 29, 37. And of course, this is 40, 65, 73, as we would expect. This is the 21st prime number. Of course, this is just to put all this in one place. This is the 12th prime number. Again, I don't know any ape that embraces the identity of ape identity syndrome who would want to sit and listen. That's why I said it's more interesting to encourage as someone who can interact, anyone can interact with these texts at any level, even if you're in elementary school. But if you multiply these, you get 2701. And then I'll go very, very slow. I'll write quickly, but I will explain it. When the dispute over, as Dr. Penn, consistent with the use of ratios, inverse relationships, here the relationship of letters and words, one thing he always said is every letter holds an implication. And of course, we now see the staggering results of just taking the 18 factors, multiple languages, multiple authors, multiple genres, multiple continents, just the big things, and you come up with just 18 factorial. 18, and use this process called Factorial. you come up with 6 quadrillion ways that the Bible could have otherwise been. But the dispute over age of the earth would be like disputing letters versus words. It really, those can't be separated. But the difference lay between 6 and 20,000 years, chronological years. And when we were given the assignment, of course, I'd been his graduate assistant, that is Dr. Penn's graduate assistant in the seminary. And then after he retired, I began working as a research assistant for him. But to take this, take the difference, start with 6,000, and then notice the range here. The range was 6 to 20,000. There we go, 6 to 20,000 years. And of course, the difference was 14,000. So when we give them the assignment, Eddie Johnson and I happily worked as research assistants. So we started at 6,000 and just go 2,050 years at a time. So we started with the very first number. And of course, that's at 12 hours a day. Jesus said there's 12 hours in the day. And then at 6,250 chronological years at 12 hours a night. You remember we learned that we don't speak of night. If someone says, how many days are there in a year? We answer days. We don't even ask how many nights are there in a year. We learned in the Bible that the Bible speaks of 40 days and 40 nights. Jesus said 12 hours in a day. We then, as Dr. Penn said, must include 12 hours per night. We did. We found out we had approximately 12,500 years at 24 hours per, that is, total now. We have all that. So we went and used that ratio, which is an inverse relationship. We know the inverse relationship between multiplication and division. They're both inversely related. We know decay rates and growth rates are inversely related. They're not incremental. They're not one for one. So I'll just write this over here, the 1 day to 1,000 years. And again, you can do this in your elementary studies at your church there, 1,000 years to 1 day. 1 day. So we have this ratio. They're reciprocals. We know that. So we were to go here, and so we took this 4.5 million days, just using the numbers in the Bible, which Dr. Penn insisted on that. And I'll put a link or all the 9 books from Dr. Johnny Penn's creation series. Put those links in the description. I'll put the link to this PDF. So you have all this, but those of you that have been in this class working, you now know there is great value to press on and continue to interact with the text and notice there's things that are far beyond what the ridicule actually enhances. Someone was trying to say textual variances, tampering with the text, and maybe someone monkeying around with the manuscripts, which I thought that's funny. But that gave us 45 million total days, which when we multiply it by 1,000 years equaled 4.5 billion. Now, you may not find very many scientists prepared to discuss with you, and notice that you were wanting to know the difference between, are we measuring the compounded decay that results from both physical and chemical forces? For example, magma was produced by Mount St. Helens. Then 10 years later, it was measured and it showed hundreds, maybe 100,000 years old. However, it was a measure, however, of the consequences of physical and chemical forces that would show the cumulative or compounded decay incurred as a result of such a violent episode. So 4.5 billion years, I'll just say compounded, trying to spell it out for everyone, compounded decay, because it's really quite interesting as I'm working with Eddie Johnson now to finish our second book about this ape identity syndrome. And of course, the work I quoted earlier, Josh McDowell, 1979, and then these types of things and these types of things, of course, will all be there included. And then spelling this out in a manner that really can't be overlooked or can't be misunderstood. So we have compounded decay. Well, then we went 1,000 years per day. I mean, yeah, equals a day. So we went this direction, 4.5 billion years. So we're already in years, so we want to convert that to days. So multiply it by 1,000 days. And of course, 1,000 days is approximately 2.78 360 day years. And of course, consistent with what we would expect the Bible to be, consistent with what we know here, we have an approximate value of E, which would emerge as that according to which this compounded decay would be experienced. And so now we have 12.5 billion years of compounded decay. So like I said, this argument over chronological versus compound decay is not really even discussed, because no one would put those at odds with each other any more than someone would take words and contradict them with letters. You have to have the letters to have the words. You notice the inverse relationship here, ratio going here. So this is, again, just how to spell it out as a mere human with our diminished capacities, as I say in pun, because those identifying themselves as apes and are seriously saying that are saying that has something to do with their education and their embracing evolution, although they admit they have a no longer existing ancestor. They admit that it's processes. So they can't affirm and won't affirm God-given rights, the inalienable rights that we know in this country, United States of America. They don't acknowledge the wall of separation that was a product of collaboration with Thomas Jefferson, a political scientist, and then those scientists who worked in the science of hermeneutics, the Anabaptists, who collaborated to assure the First Amendment as we know it, the inalienable right of conscience, freedom of conscience, thought, and speech, and the wall of separation essentially being built to assure no religion commandeers our state, then deploys it to impose and enforce its morals and dogma. So yes, it's something we should enjoy talking about, and I'll step away for those of you who want to see the screen and would like to see just how meticulous and detailed, and yet it's quite self-evident. None of these numbers we're just dealing with 0 through 9. It's very easy. We're just dealing with multiplication and division. So that's the way Dr. John Penn said, if do this in a manner that communicates where everyone can understand it and anyone can demonstrate it. And that's what we've done. So you have a blessed day. Enjoy this lesson. But remember, the power of God is in his message. We preach the gospel of the glory of Christ. There is no power in this universe greater than that which is accomplished through the power of his gospel. So you have a blessed day. Enjoy this lesson.